lectures that my wife helped shape into this book were delivered a quarter of a century ago. It is hard even for persons who were then active, let alone for the more than half of the current population who were then less than 10 years old or had not yet been born, to reconstruct the intellectual climate of the time. Those of us who were deeply concerned about the danger to freedom and prosperity from the growth of government, from the triumph of welfare state and Keynesian ideas, were a small, beleaguered minority regarded as eccentrics by the great majority of our fellow intellectuals. Even 7 years later, when this book was first published, its views were so far out of the mainstream that it was not reviewed by any major national publication, not by the New York Times or the Herald Tribune, then still being published in New York, or the Chicago Tribune, or by Time or Newsweek or even the Saturday Review, though it was reviewed by the London Economist and by the major professional journals. And this for a book directed at the general public, written by a professor at a major U.S. university, and destined to sell more than 400,000 copies in the next 18 years. It is inconceivable that such a publication by an economist of comparable professional standing, but favorable to the welfare state or socialism or communism, would have received a similar silent treatment. How much the intellectual climate has changed in the past quarter century is attested to by the very different reception that greeted my wife's and my book, Free to Choose, a direct lineal descendant of Capitalism and Freedom, presenting the same basic philosophy, and published in 1980. That book was reviewed by every major publication, frequently in a featured, lengthy review. It was not only partly reprinted in Book Digest, but also featured on the cover. Free to Choose sold some 400,000 hardcover copies in the U.S. in its first year, has been translated into 12 foreign languages, and was issued in early 1981 as a mass-market paperback. The difference in reception of the two books cannot, we believe, be explained by a difference in quality. Indeed, the earlier book is the more philosophical and abstract, and hence more fundamental. Free to Choose, as we said in its preface, has more nuts and bolts, less theoretical framework. It complements rather than replaces Capitalism and Freedom. On a superficial level, the difference in reception can be attributed to the power of television. Free to Choose was based on and designed to accompany our PBS series of the same name, and there can be little doubt that the success of the TV series gave prominence to the book. That explanation is superficial because the existence and success of the TV program itself is testimony to the change in the intellectual climate. We were never approached in the 1960s to do a TV series like Free to Choose. There would have been few, if any, sponsors for such a program. If, by any chance, such a program had been produced, there would have been no significant audience receptive to its views. No, the different reception of the later book and the success of the TV series are common consequences of the change in the climate of opinion. The ideas in our two books are still far from being in the intellectual mainstream, but they are now at least respectable in the intellectual community, and very likely almost conventional among the broader public. The change in the climate of opinion was not produced by this book or the many others, such as Hayek's Road to Serfdom and Constitution of Liberty, in the same philosophical tradition. For evidence of that, it is enough to point to the call for contributions to the symposium Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, issued by the editors of Commentary in 1978, which went in part, "The idea that there may be an inescapable connection between capitalism and democracy has recently begun to seem plausible to a number of intellectuals who once would have regarded such a view not only as wrong but even as politically dangerous." My contribution consisted of an extensive quotation from Capitalism and Freedom, a briefer one from Adam Smith, and a closing invitation, "Welcome aboard." Even in 1978, of the 20